Good morning, everyone. This is People of Substance by LemonSkies, and my guest today is Kat Landa. So I will let you introduce yourself, but I'm just going to start here. So you and I actually met because we were serving on the same committee for a Bridge conference, Bridge Marketing
That's
Conference.
right.
And it was, the first Zoom, I think I knew you were my people. And Kat is currently at the Development Guild, which is an executive recruitment agency for not specializing for nonprofits. So she'll talk about that. And she has tons and tons of background from branding. She has some heavy video background experience. So she's kind of done it all. So Kat, please say hi.
Hello. So excited to be here with you this morning. I've got my coffee ready because I know you've got questions.
I do. Kathy's on the West Coast, so there's that.
That's right.
We do have
Yes.
a little bit of a time difference.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm going to jump right in.
Go for it.
So fundraising, I've been struck lately. We talk about fundraising strategies and we talk about segmentation and we talk about messaging. And what we don't talk about enough is really what is I think of as the most important fundraising strategy, and that's staff. Getting the right people in the driver's seat, empowering people to make decisions, to think outside the box, to really kind of reach and achieve things. So that's really one of my questions for you. First, what are you seeing in development space as far as trends go?
There's so much going on. I think, unless you're necessarily a specialist in the area, you're not going to be as aware, right? So there's so many different things I can share with you, but I'll share a couple. One piece that's just top of mind because it's being legislated more closely and more regularly right now is salary transparency. So a lot of conversations that we have as an organization is coaching clients, coaching nonprofit organizations around what to do with that, because for many organizations, they haven't planned for something like that, meaning there may be a lack of parity across roles and experience levels and so forth. So they're terrified of having to publish what a new role might be because they haven't had those conversations historically and they have some catch-up work to do. There's been some scenarios where we've been able to kind of step in and help demonstrate to a board where things should be and what that should look like or could look like, and be able to bring parity across an entire organization out of a conversation about one individual role. But definitely the move to create legislation around pay transparency has opened up a lot of conversations for a lot of organizations. So we have so many states now, New York and California being inclusive of that, where we have to publish the range. It has to be stated in the initial job description announcement. And again, that starts a lot of conversation. So I think it's an incredible move to be in a space where you're working around those conversations and negotiating that as you go. It's such an uncomfortable area for recruiters, for the people looking for jobs, for the organization, for everyone. So to have just the clarity out there and to have had all the clarity conversations prior to posting, it just eliminates so much of the messiness. People know what to expect. They know what jobs to go after. You eliminate kind of some of the volume of people responding to something that it's never going to work for them because there's a mismatch around salary. So in so many ways, it's such a huge benefit. Now, it doesn't cover a lot, of sins in a sense. So, but I think that's the right thing. I think those conversations need to be had. I think organizations need to wrestle with some of those issues to be able to walk into this next decade of this type of work. And we know historically too, in general, nonprofits can have a difficult time maintaining, I don't know that anybody's necessarily aiming for corporate parity in pay, but at the very least, being able to pay people their value and pay people appropriately for the work that they're accomplishing and contributing. I think it's such an important conversation to continue to have. So that's a big trend, I think, going on. Another piece has to be absolutely diversity, equity, inclusion. And that, is expanding to some other really important areas like belonging, DEIB, or JDI, EIB, J for justice. So there's a lot of areas where there's movement now to just recognize the difficulty that people may have in approaching, let's just say, a position, right? It starts at the very beginning. Even in just who might apply, who might see themselves, in the role, right? That's a whole nother conversation of seeing yourself in a role, right? It's insane to think how far back all of this starts. The disparities start very early in the conception of a role, right? We see, I interviewed a woman for a position last week, and much of her career has been in the media space and television, and having the opportunity to influence future careers for different types of people, subsets of people, for women, for people of color. Because if you can't see yourself in a role, you can't imagine that you could be that role. So it starts so far back, right? And I don't know if you've heard of this, but it's fascinating, the CSI effect. Prior to CSI, being on the air with a female scientist lead as a lead forensic investigator, there was very little interest in that career by women. And post those shows coming out, and I think there's maybe 6 or 7 of them total at this point, there was a 50% increase in those enrolled and graduating into those positions, women moving into those positions. So there's such an influence at the very beginning. And then we come in into this space of looking for talent and placing talent at a point where we can have a lot of influence. And I think the first step in the trending is just awareness. So first of all, we're working with organizations that are asking us, will you be making this part of your process? Will you have a diverse pool of candidates? Do you find all the kind of people out there that could be right for this role, and not just some of the kind of people that could be right for this role? And that starts with, within educating staff on bias, unconscious bias, conscious bias, how to be an ally, how to be a sponsor, very simple things like awareness, language, right? And that's not just around people of color, that's people with disabilities, that's veterans, that there's so many categories, right, to be more aware of. And if you just haven't had the language or you haven't had the conversation, you're just going to be less aware. So building that awareness and education into the staff people that will be working on something all throughout the process is like a step number 1. Beyond that, for instance, at our firm, we've gone much deeper on that and plan to continue to do so. So we've worked with an outside consultant to come in and help us break down our whole process. Where could there be bias? How do we do our best to eliminate that? Again, starting with education, but you can also affect, the process that we use, the places that we go. Very simple example is our work is interesting in that, typical recruiting, you might have a recruiter whose job it is to work with, they have 6 candidate clients and they're looking for positions for those candidates. Whereas we work really directly for the nonprofit and we're finding them one perfect person, so to speak, for a role, right? So we have the ability to not just receive applicants, advertise, bring things in, which is one space already to affect. Where are you advertising? Right. Are you advertising in such traditional media that they're not reaching everyone, because that has its own, historical bent, right? But in terms of that's just sort of the catching people coming in. We actually go out and research and bring candidates in who fit the profile of what that client needs and is looking for. Well, how are we doing our research, right? Are we getting into all the potential places where excellent candidates can be found because of all of the historical, sort of structural racism, structural, inequity that's in our traditional systems of research and finding people and information, right? So it's breaking all of that down. So that's a lot, right? And that's for a big organization to take on. But just, I think something helpful to understand trending wise and what you could do in your own organization is, number 1, education first. So there are such simple solutions. LinkedIn Learning, that's a great place. There are some excellent single classes or series of classes where as a group or an HR department or an organization, you could get together, watch through some of these, have some good conversations. And that's a great starting point if you're not doing a lot around that already.
Well, and I like what you said, just being aware is sort of that first step, before action comes, you just have to recognize and, have that awareness that it is an issue to consider and think about. So it's there. But I want to go actually back to your point about pay transparency. Is that exposing inequities that are, gender, demographic, specific?
That's a great question. I think, say it again.
Is it too soon to tell?
I think it's a little too soon to tell. I do think, I actually think it's going to have positive outcome and effect there. Because again, once you know something, right? Once you have that awareness. So in the pay transparency piece, I think people are going to realize what people make doing certain things. And sometimes that's going to be bad. Like that's it for that role. But I think in a lot of cases, it's going to be really good for people to see what kind of salaries people are making, especially as a minority group. You're telling me they're paying so-and-so whatever. I would never have thought to ask for that, right? I think that is going to open things up dramatically because if you don't know what the going rate is, or, you can research online, average salaries of this and that, but you're like, nobody really gets that, right? Or I couldn't get that, right? But when you see, someone, someone in your peer group, a neighbor, so-and-so, and you have some information about what that role looked like and how much they're paying for it, you start to go, oh my gosh, maybe I need to value myself more. It kind of goes back to the, women traditionally, when they're looking for a job, will not apply unless they are 100% of the qualifications, right? Men, 65%, I think is the going number. Like, I could do that, so just, of course, those are gross generalizations, but there is some data there that's sort of backing that. But the same thing applies here in the minority group world, is that, we have statements even on our applications with some clients where we talk about and where they're at on their DI journey. And we'll say, we find that there's a statement, we find that people of, particular groups do not apply unless they see themselves having all of these qualifications. We want to encourage you to apply, to come and tell us what you have, what you've done. So I think it will open things more than close things, create more solutions than problems.
I read something similar where, this is not necessarily just a application and hiring, but also that women are rewarded for achievements and men are rewarded for potential. And that just really, reflecting on that. And I think some of it is we bear some responsibility in kind of how we carry ourselves.
Yeah, I think, whether we should have to or not, it's just an unfortunate reality. It's just an unfortunate truth, right? And so we do have to kind of own our own narrative in that. And we have to address the disparities ourselves. If you're in a situation or a system where they're not aware of that and it's not top of mind and it is subconscious and you see it happening, if you don't say anything about it, nothing's going to change. So whether or not you feel like you should have to, if you don't, nothing changes, right? So, and I've been really fortunate to be in a lot of situations where I've had a sponsor and oftentimes a male sponsor who was paving that way, who was asking for what needed to happen and so forth. But I've been in some scenarios where I had to be like, excuse me, we've got something here that we need to address, in an appropriate way. But yeah, it happens. I'm amazed and blown away. I think the more I learn the depth of the roots here, it's so, so, so deep. And I think people who kind of think this is fluff and brush up against it, or they bristle when you're like, oh, DEI, and they're just like, oh gosh, I could not be more maddened because it just shows such a lack of education, a lack of understanding, a lack of willingness to understand, and the data, the stories, the evidence, it's undeniable
Mhm.
how much bias exists in all that we're doing here. And it's interesting. I have a friend of mine who recently moved to London. She's a person of color. And I only mention that because we have a lot of conversations around what it meant to be in the US versus what it means to be there and her
Mhm.
own personal experience in a number of facets, including how she identifies and represents herself. And, one of the things is you start to realize, born and raised in the US, you kind of have, wherever your immediate background is from, right? My own personal experience here in the US, I don't feel too sheltered, but, I'm somewhat sheltered. I live in California. It's a totally different, I've seen and visited hundreds and hundreds of small towns across the United States in the last 15 years. But, I have a certain POV from living here. You start to learn a lot about yourself and your
Mhm.
experience when you're talking with people from other countries. Um, and I've had the privilege of being able to do that kind of international travel and spend time in some other places. And just the conversations we've had lately and the um, good and bad of the comparisons, it just really starts to break down your, um, I don't know, your sort of like cheery, rosy, like everything's fine, right? In the place where I come from, right? There's a sort of you want to love where you're from in a sense. You want to identify with it. But there's just so much under there. We can't ignore it. We can still love being here, but there's so much to address. There's so much to address.
I find so. I grew up in the Midwest, and in Midwest, I would be sort of, I don't know about labeled, but I'd be considered a little
Mm.
more on the type A side. And then once you
Okay.
move to the East Coast, I'm really not a very aggressive or very, compared to a lot of
Interesting.
people, not a very assertive person. I'm the same person. I
Uh-huh.
think it's sort of the context around you changes. Um,
Yeah.
as you're describing it, that really kind of reminded me of that.
Yeah, it just, identity is such a huge piece of all of this,
Yeah.
and everyone's coming from where they come from, right?
Right.
So we like in a DEI conversation, a hiring conversation, a patrons, you're bringing with you everything that you've experienced and
Mhm.
everything your family has experienced and so on and so forth, right? So I think it's actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because um it's just an important ingredient in understanding and communicating and moving forward in
Yes.
business and in life is to be able to realize that people are just coming from different places. So your conversation might have to look a little different, and also not to just write people off for their seeming belief or bent or
Mhm.
have a conversation. There's more to it. There's a reason why they are where they are. You're in a different part of the journey, right? So, and we've been able to kind of address that ourselves in our own friendship meeting kind of later in life. And I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more.
Oh yeah, no. Well, let's move on to that. And last thing I'm going to say about pay transparency, and I think it'll hopefully level off, but I'm seeing some pretty wild ranges. So
Yeah.
even if they're becoming transparent, some of the ranges it's sort
Yeah.
of like to the entire digit differences.
Yeah.
You know,
That's not a range. Number
no,
one.
it's basically like,
So,
entire scale.
and again, I'm going to applaud them for taking the step, whether it was because it was legislated or not.
Mhm.
But they have work to do still
Yeah.
if they're in that space. And it's probably because they have work to do still. They haven't had the conversations around what they're going to do and clarity and
Mhm.
parity and all of those pieces. So that's why you're seeing things like that. I think people also misunderstand. I think there's this idea that there's where budget is, there's where
Mhm.
comfort is, there's where, and like a conversation we have when we have people help consider their range, obviously research and all of these different things. But we also ask them, what happens if you have this knockout candidate that just really, what would you do then? Like, that's a great question because then you start to go, wow, okay, well, yeah, I mean, I would be willing to do XYZ.
Mhm.
So, and how does that play into the range in itself? Um, yeah, it cannot be wildly spanned or it's not really a range.
Yeah.
Come on, like let's put our best effort here. What is the value to you of this position?
Yeah.
What's the value to the organization? And let's do our best to be representative of that.
That makes sense. So you started kind of teased out the topic of adult friendships, and
Yeah.
when we're little, we're sort of in school setting, or then you're kind of dumped in a college dorm if you go to college.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of you meet people, and some of them you grow very close with, some you don't. We don't have the same luxury as adults. So
Mm.
how do we build friendships that are our own, that are not tied to our kids are in the same class, so I guess we might as well be friends,
Yeah.
but where it's friendships that are fulfilling to you as a human, not just based on proximity or convenience.
Yeah. I'm a big believer. If you read anything I end up putting out there, you'll find quickly that I'm a big believer in community.
Mhm.
You can have, the best house and the best location, your preferred everything. If you don't have community, you're not going to be successful, happy, satisfied. Um, it's just such a necessary part of how I believe we're created as human beings is to connect and to commune with others.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I have a extremely fresh example of this because we made a decision as a family, which is a whole nother talk, to make a huge change in our life and to completely uproot and to move to a tiny little town.
Mhm.
Um, it was the right move for us. There were so many wonderful things about it, so many things that afforded us, so many things that of goals that we wanted to meet within our family. But we got here and we didn't know anybody. And, it took a while. We came during COVID. That's a tough time to make new friends, right? And you're right. I mean, one of the main sources for us did end up being the kids' school. That was
Mhm.
definitely a place where we had some exposure and were able to meet some people. But it is difficult late in life. So many people have already made those lifetime friendships and relationships. It's like my husband and I will say, like, their dance card is full.
Yeah.
I mean, at this point, there's only so much time to cultivate a few close relationships. I know some people who do more than that, but I just don't have the capacity,
Yeah.
right? So what does that look like? Because we know we need it. It's tough to come by. Um, I think I kind of just looked for saying yes to certain things, just
Yeah.
saying yes to stuff I would normally not go for, right? Yeah, sure, I'll go to that talk, or I'll go to this thing, or I'll come to this event, or I'll join this professional. Like, I have not joined a professional um association
Mhm.
like the entire time I've been a fundraiser. I'm a CFRE, so I guess that kind of counts, but like I've never really joined AFP. I've never, but by golly, I did here because I was like, I need to meet some people. But in reality, there was some here and there, and sort of now we're 18 months in, almost 2 years in, and it's come fairly slowly. But interestingly enough, a lot of sort of my work community and friendship community has actually been in the social space, which
Yeah.
I was avoiding like the plague, to be quite honest. A year and a half ago, I was like, oh God, LinkedIn, oh God,
Yeah.
right? But what's happened is I've met incredible people like you, right? And we've already had the opportunity to see each other in person twice
Yeah.
since we met.
Yeah.
So yeah, so
We met on Zoom.
it's a tough it's a tough game, I feel like
Yeah.
at this age, but it's still possible.
And
Yeah,
I
and I think
apologize for all of the barking. I think we have bad guys. So,
well, they better take care of it.
yeah.
But it
You know,
takes that openness like you had, right? You were like, I see it, I see you, where people,
Mhm.
definitely let's have a conversation outside of this, right?
Well, and I think it's also what you're describing about these lifelong relationships and
Mm,
friendships that formed early on. Their dance card is full, but I think also sometimes it can be very limiting because the person that, in middle school or in high school or, or even beyond, is your people, may not no longer be your people, but out of
yeah.
default, you sort of stick with that.
Yeah, that's the other thing is that we change over time, right?
Mhm.
So, I think about this a lot with even in marriage. It's like, how can you possibly continue this thing where you as a person are completely different than the person you were 15 years ago, 20 years ago,
Yeah.
right? And it's sort of I read this, I wish I knew the author or the particular book right now, but it talked about types of friendships.
Mhm.
and it compared them to flowers and plants, like varietals, right? So it's like you have your, and I'm going to get these all wrong, although you probably know them better than me because I know
We'll
you're a little
Google
bit of a them, but you have your perennials, you have your annuals, so it's like you have these people that I used to want to hang on to everybody that came through my life. And it felt like a big failure to me when I like lost touch with someone or we didn't talk anymore, right? And it just like faded out. And I would literally be like trying to get to that person, like, what's happened? What's wrong? Like, let's hang out, just like it was some sort of, a failure on my part of like, why couldn't we be friends? We should still be friends. And the reality is I it probably did something, whatever, but no, there's chapters, there's different, people do come and go. People, if you ever think back and look at your life and go, oh my gosh, remember that one gal? Like, what an interesting, like, she came in for like a 6-month period of my life and had this certain influence or was there for me in this certain way. And like, we never saw each other again. We never spoke again, not for any main reason, but I just love that idea. It gave me the freedom to say, like, that's okay. Like, we're not friends anymore and that's okay. And that served its purpose, or, or maybe I influenced their life or in some way, or, and these other people are just like, I know they're my ride or die, and it's not going to matter. Like I mentioned, my friend who's in London, I'm like, she's in London. Like, that's a big deal. She's been in LA with me forever and ever and ever. We've known each other since just out of college. It hasn't, I mean, yes, it changes it, but we're going to be there forever. Right. So there's just different types, and there's freedom in allowing that to happen.
Yeah. And I noticed also, I mean, I think with some, social medias can be a curse, but it can be also very positive and kind of maintaining contacts. But I think there are also some people that, you may know them on periphery. And then at some point, that periphery, like you actually do grow closer when the timing is right.
Yeah, especially when you get that slow chance of observation. You're like, I think I kind of like them. Let's see what they're like. Are we on the same page on things? Yeah, I do think that there's a positive on that for sure.
You can kind of rule out some red flags pretty quickly.
Yeah, exactly. That's for sure. Like, I'm not going to go there on that one. Yeah, for sure.
Well, for a little bit of fun to wrap up our conversation, do you know the game of Two Truths and a Lie? Have you ever played that?
I do know that game.
It's a really good game. But for you, we're going to do a special edition.
Okay.
You ready? So you're supposed to tell me 2 statements that are truthful and one that's a fib. And, try to trick me and I'll try to guess which one it is.
Okay.
But in your case, I thought we would focus on California living as your 2 truths and lie. Only because it seems like every conversation you and I have, there's been some really interesting stories. And I know some of those stories. So I know some of your celeb romance. But
that's a good one.
That is a good one.
Okay. See, I have my standard 2 truths and a lie. So I have to think for a moment because of the California bent, but I'm sure I can come up with it. Okay. Let's see. All right, here we go. Here are my statements.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay. I have had to evacuate for a natural disaster in California. I have met or seen Ashton Kutcher. And I have attended an awards show.
Oh, that's good. That's like the most California thing. So I'm going to say that evacuation absolutely happened, because I just don't know how you can live in California and not evacuate from flooding or natural disasters or earthquakes or fires. Like, there's a lot of stuff that happens that requires evacuation. I'm going to say that maybe the awards show is true, because I feel like you would have mentioned Ashton to me. So I'm just going to purely based on that. So I'm going to say that Ashton is probably made up.
Okay. Yes, I have been evacuated for natural disaster, both a fire and a mudslide.
Of course.
I wouldn't say that's just like so common, but it just happens to be true for me in this case. I have been to an awards show. I went to the People's Choice Awards in like 2008.
Okay.
Something like that. And I think I sat at a table with a winner because, this is called seat filling. They
Mhm.
want the audience to look really
Yeah.
full. So you like dress up and basically you're an extra. I think it was Kite Runner that I was at their
Okay.
table and they won.
Okay. That's
And
exciting.
then I have not met Ashton, but I did see him.
Oh, did you?
I did see him.
You
We
take
had a
it?
string of sightings this summer, just like out of no, like the whole time we had been here, we hadn't seen anybody, wasn't planning on it. And in this new area. And yeah, we saw Conan O'Brien, Ashton, Mila, and his name escapes me. Who's doing Barbie?
Is it the Hey Girl guy?
Yes,
Um,
from The Notebook.
yeah.
Ryan Reynolds? No,
No, the other Ryan. Ryan Gosling?
this is bad. Ryan Gosling. Yes,
Gosling.
Ryan Gosling and his gorgeous wife, Eva Mendes, who was stunningly beautiful.
And you resisted taking a photo, as I recall.
I resisted taking the photo. I was trying to be a normal human being. I don't know how good of a job I was doing at it, but I made it.
Well,
I had a dog. I had my dog with me, which was the perfect way to be like, they were like, "Oh, can I pet your dog?" I'm like, "Yeah." I don't know who you guys are. You're just random people on the street. Come on and pet my dog.
Yeah, so you kind of had a very normal. Ava is probably watching as we speak, right?
I'm sure. You were lovely and amazing, and I loved watching you talk to your sweet girls who were playing. She was wonderful. Very normal.
All right. Well, thank you for coming today. This was fun. This was
Yes.
for celebrity kind of celeb adjacent edition.
Celeb adjacent sightings. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
So we may start the whole string on that spot a
Yeah.
celebrity and act like a normal
I like
human.
that. Yeah.
All right. Good to see you, Kat. Thanks for
Oh,
joining
good to
me
see
today.
you. Thank you, friend. I'm so honored to be featured on LemonSkies. I've been waiting for that call for at least a year. So I'm glad to finally be here.
Good to see you.
Bye.